Welcome to Fostering Literacy in Multi-Age Primary Classrooms. This is a collaboration between the University of British Columbia, the Ministry of Education, and the Rural Education Advisory. When we reflected last year and looked at all the feedback and what was really important to folks, we came to a conversation around the importance of multi-age and multi-year classrooms, and also the lack of conversation around this. And so we're going to hang out here. If you don't teach in a multi-age classroom, don't worry. It's still great pedagogy. But it also helps us really think about our primary learners and all the magnificent things we can do in our contexts. My name's Leyton Schnellert, and I'll be your handful of a guide for this series this year. And I am an associate professor at the University of British Columbia, and I also have a research chair. I'm the Eleanor Ricks Professor in Rural Teacher Education. So glad to be here with you all. Along with my co-presenters today, the magnificent Faye Brownlie, who really does need no introduction, but Faye has been a leader in literacy in this province, specifically in early years. There was a project back in 1980-81, Faye, which you were very young in, of course, called the Young Writers Project. Yeah. Which really transformed the pedagogy in this province and continues to make us a thinking, focused, literacy-oriented location. We're also thrilled to have Jacquie Crozier join us. Thanks, Jacquie. I hope I said it right. I've had some time to spend time in Jackie's class with her students having good times. Who are you? I'm Dr. Schnellert. You have bat teeth, I believe one student told me, and I said, thank you. And I also thrilled to have Briana Adams here, who's a teacher consultant in the Richmond School District. And Briana works in both French and English. And so we're just delighted as a team to be here today, hanging out with you all. Please note that if you signed up for this workshop, you will be emailed in about a week or 10 days with a link to the recording so that you can watch it again or share it if you'd like. And also for folks who couldn't be with us today, they did sign up knowing that they can watch the video again later. So the recording is on, and we'll edit it a little bit here and there, but just so you know that that's what we're doing to create access for everyone. And you can find the recordings also on the ruralteachers.com website as ELVLC, which I can't wait. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you from Syilx territory, and I'm so fortunate. I was working with a knowledge holder this morning, Anona Campi, and just to learn and understand how language and people and places are not separate from Indigenous perspectives, and to remember that the land offers us language and opportunity and acts as that third teacher for us as well. And so I'm just grateful to be here living and learning in this place and recognize the stewardship of our First Peoples from our locations and the work that they are welcoming us to be part of, but also our responsibility to learn from and with our local nations and the land in ways that recognize the deep connection that cannot be separate from those peoples and that place. I'm going to start with just a few ideas, folks, on this year's theme. And the first I'm going to talk a little bit about is just multi-age classrooms overall. And so multi-age classrooms and multi-age groupings, which have been in rural settings around for forever, but also are a choice organizational strategy in larger centers, really is about diversity. Can I just highlight that, everyone? A multi-age or a multi-grade classroom is designed for maximum diversity, not to kind of stream kids into categories, but to say everybody's welcome, and diversity is our strength. Research findings from many, many studies over the last 50 to 55 years have really showed that multi-age groupings really enhance students' self-concept. When you're in a multi-age class, there's really an attention to like, who are you and what do you bring versus comparing you to a grade level. And also tend to develop more positive attitude towards schools because there's more of this kind of family communal approach. Research has shown really significant social, emotional, and academic benefits for kids in multi-age classrooms because they're learning from and with others, and diversity is in the norm. So we say a little bit like, this is what grade 2s do. And we say more like, how are you doing? What's your next step? What's your plan? But what we also know from the research is that we really need to think about in a multi-age classroom, who are our learners and what are their learning profiles? And then how do I organize my classroom in ways that create opportunities for those learners and their learning? Multi-age classrooms, all classrooms really require some degree of differentiating and individualizing because our learners need to be met where they're at to move them forward. So it does help us think, everybody, about responding to the learners who are with us. Just a term you may have heard. If you haven't heard this word, you're welcome. Is my sound on? I'm usually funnier. Thank you, Shauna. Thank you, Coco. Corey, you're in. So looping is a concept really deeply connected to the multi-age or multi-years literature, which is you teach your kids for more than 1 year. And so what you're able to do is be more responsive to their needs and grow them from where they're at. Research suggests that when you loop with kids, so spend 2 or 3 years with the same kids, it increases their achievement because you're meeting them more where they're at. Families tend to participate more in the classroom and in the education process because they know you. They're like, oh, you have Mr. Schnellert again. He's wearing that tie again this year. Let's buy him a different one for Christmas. Not that they have to buy me a tie, but I've received a lot of ties. And apparently I could have been on Blue's Clues, according to many a parent that I've worked with. We also see better school attendance in classes where there's looping because they feel a relationship and a connection and they want to come and be there. Fewer behavior challenges or disciplinary things. And that really, my friends, helps us think about what we're doing in terms of our teaching. Personalizing the learning is also easier in a looped classroom because you know your kids, right? And so often when I've taught in a looped class, I know 2/3 of my kids or half my kids, especially when I have 3 grades in my classroom, which I have to say is my personal favorite, because by year 3, they're like, oh, Mr. Schnellert, let me teach them. And I'm like, no problem, because there's a lot of coaching from the more experienced kids to the newer kids. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight in my last couple minutes here that there are many ways that we can organize or teach in multi-years classrooms. Quite common is to say across the grades I'm working with, what's one thing that we can learn and delve into deeply? And so that really moves away from it's grade 2, I have to do this, to say what could we explore together really deeply? We often look to find synergies between the grades. And if you take a look at the curricular competencies, you'll see they don't really, anybody notice this? They don't really change much from grade to grade. Anybody else pick this up? So it's kind of like, we're all working on significance, woo! But sorry, I get a little hyped up, people. But it really just helps us think about this idea that we are working and building a competency, and it's around we're developing from where we are. Sometimes what we do is we start with an anchor lesson with everybody, but we can do a little differentiation. I just want to point out that maybe the differentiation isn't by the grade. It's actually opportunities for the learners, right? And so one of the beautiful things about a multi-age classroom is we're already thinking about diversity from the beginning. Just want to highlight that one of the most important things we can do is give kids a chance to ask questions or wonder or talk about their learning or talk about their home lives. And so creating opportunities for kids to share what they know is really important, which leads us to the last point. And Faye, I'm so fortunate that you're going to pick up the threads after me. But just this idea of open-ended strategies can be so powerful because they make space for all kids' knowledge, their wonderings, their thinkings, and their experiences. So instead of saying, what's the right thing? We say, what do you know about this? What do you think about this? What do you think now? And when we create spaces of wonder and noticing, there's a low floor where everyone can get in, but there's a high ceiling where you can take it as far as you want because kids are just so knowledgeable or so excited about a topic. And so I open the conversation, everybody, with this notion of multi-age, multi-grade spaces are really spaces of welcoming for everybody where we get to know our kids and we grow them from where they're at. I'm going to pass over to Faye now. Faye, I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here too. So let me share my screen. So Leyton and I seem to have developed this relationship where we absolutely never set eyes on one another in the real world, but we talk from land to land to land. So we are not together again today in real space, only virtual space. And I'm thankful to be living, working, and playing on the unceded and ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. On Friday, I was fortunate to listen to Murray Sinclair talk at the BC teleconference, and one of the things he talked at length about was land acknowledgements and how important it was for us to acknowledge just not the peoples that have come before us on the land, but the land itself. And Leyton, you made reference to that and the relationship with the land. And I thought, oh, I better change my slides then to talk about a real look at the land. And I invite all of you to think about that piece about how important the land is in the work we do for ourselves and the life that we have, and as well for our kids. I want to talk a tiny bit, adding my voice onto the multi-aging piece from the experiential piece, not just from the research piece that Leyton was talking about. I think the greatest benefit, and my favorite school to be in, is a school that is set up so that all kids are involved in multi-age groups. The power of relationships, of starting off a year knowing half of your kids or a significant group of your kids and knowing them well and knowing their families, to me is just indescribably wonderful. It makes such a difference to how the doors open in your classroom and kids come in. Routines are already established. They're shared by the kids who were there already. They welcome in the new people and tell them how things happen in this classroom. This is all of those pieces that take so long to establish in a primer classroom. When we're beginning and getting those routines in place, and we know how incredibly important they are, that's eased so much when it's shared. That whole leadership around establishing routines is shared by everybody in the classroom. By the very definition, more choice is available for kids. Not just their learners, but also their families. And because you have this established relationship with a group of kids and with their families, it gives you that much more time, which we're always looking for, to really get to know those new kids a little bit faster as they're coming in, a little bit more quickly, and within the context of a classroom that's moving more quickly at the beginning. From a school point of view, one of the things that I think is just so significant that happens in our province are those meetings that we have that begin in May sometimes and certainly go through June, where we agonize over the placement of children in next year's classes. And as soon as we have multi-age classes, when we have that choice, rather than it's there because it's of the numbers of kids in the school, we have more choices for learner placement. Where are the best places for kids to be? And so we try and keep as many of our kids with the previous teacher possible. But then we also have more room for movement. And we know sometimes just the social aspect of learning means that some kids work better with some of their mates and some work less well. And so it gives us a few more choices of where we can place some of the more complex kids as we begin. Leyton made reference to the fact that we don't have to teach a grade curriculum. And I think when we look at our, we can't even say new curriculum any longer because it's been around for a while, but our curriculum's all based on competencies. So there's not an end point of what you have to be done with at the end of kindergarten, at the end of grade 1. It really is that cyclical growth. And so it's set up for an opportunity to look at a multi-age classroom. And then the last piece is that it really does acknowledge and celebrate diversity. We don't talk about who's in grade 1 and who's in grade 2 and who's in grade 3. We talk about our kids. And sometimes we call them who's our expert. Who's our expert group that's ready for this piece? Who's the group that's feeling confident about this? Who's the group that wants to try out this piece? But we talk about and we help kids learn to acknowledge what they know right now and what they're working on. And so we're all in that piece of talking about our accomplishments, our strengths and our stretches, both individually and collectively. So when we're moving into today's conversation, there's some key questions that we want to continue to think about. The first is, who are my learners? It's the question that we have in the front of our mind always. Who are these kids? What are their strengths? What are their stretches? We've spent a lot of time in September and October getting to know our kids, both as a group, as a whole group, and then the individuals within it. So that's our starting point. The other piece that we really talk about, and we need to be talking about this in our province and across our country. It's like the elephant in the room these days, where we're thinking about how do we integrate word work into meaningful context for our learners and for that diverse group of learners. It's not about are you this or are you that, but it's a piece that all primary teachers know and recognize, that we don't learn to read and write without paying attention to how words, all the code-based pieces of words. And so we really think about how we're working in that multi-age group where there's lots of, sometimes that seems more complex because of the diversity that's in there, but it's one of our big questions in thinking about integrating word work into the work that we're doing with reading and writing in our classrooms. We think as well about, and one of our key questions is, how do we include everybody, all our learners, in meaningful whole class literacy lessons in a multi-age group? It's never all about small groups. It's never all about individuals, but it's one of the organizations and that we have in a multi-age classroom. And we think about, what does it look like when everybody is doing something that recognizes their access and their starting and takes as far as they can? And we think about, so how do we organize for this instruction? What are some of the patterns in here that it can look like so that everybody does have a place to be and a place to grow? So this is a very quick touch base back to some of the big things that we talked about last year. We can't help but start with the literacy meaning, the literacy definition, that comes from the ministry. And I think this is so important for us all to be remembering. It's literacy is about making meaning and expressing ourselves in a variety of modes. And no matter where our kids are on this journey, from the 4 and 5-year-olds who enter in kindergarten, it is the primary purpose. And so we really want to make sure that we continue to focus on joy and creativity while we're thinking about making meaning and communicating. And within that, we think about connections, critical analysis, comprehending, creating, communicating with all kids and always. I couldn't resist this picture. Many of you will remember Harp from last year. She was part of our series. And this is a perfect example of multi-aging at home, where all our kids are in that multi-age environment. They aren't separated into grades or little channels by the age they are. So her daughters are 5 and 2. And one of the things they like to do before bed is to read together. And you can see that the 2-year-old is doing exactly the kind of behaviors that we're trying to support in a multi-age classroom. What are those others doing? I want to join that club. And so it's just that reminder that part of multi-aging is part of the naturalness of learning. The piece we always keep coming back and talking about, and we have always, and it's resurfaced with some new lenses this time, or maybe some revisited lenses, but we think about this group of kids that we've got, and we think about that multi-aging, and we think about how with all of our kids, we're looking both at word recognition and word production and creating meaning and communication. And so those are our two biggest lenses that we look at in terms of literacy development. And so as a classroom teacher, as a support person working with classroom teachers, we're thinking about what's the plan for the whole group and how do we address the diversity within that. But one of the pieces that's important about both these two lenses that we look at is where they intersect. So we don't talk just about meaning without talking about words. We don't talk just about words without talking about meaning and communication. And we keep that as one of our lenses as we're planning for instruction. Last year, Briana talked about the pillars of literacy that the Richmond School District developed and has been continuing to work with. And we think about how all these pieces come together in the primary classroom, where we're thinking about, for all kids, again, comprehension, concepts of text, phonological awareness, vocabulary and background knowledge, phonics, and decoding and context. As we do in straight grades, when we're thinking about learners within straight grades, which was more of our focus last year, or the multi-age this year, we think about how all kids need all of these pieces and how do we work with these pieces in pulling together our programming. We also talked about the role of the teacher from modeling through to independence. And this diagram that I adapted from the work, excuse me, of Fountas and Pinnell, and is focusing more on reading, but works very similarly with writing. Start that direct instruction, high teacher support, low student control. And we think about when we're planning, how do we ensure that we have some time where everybody is together in that interactive read aloud or that writing in front of your kids, where we are modeling what's going on in our minds as we're constructing a message or deconstructing a message in a text. We release some control to the kids in a shared read. We are kind of in a balance of almost that intersection of equal amounts of control in the guided reading or small groups, including skill groups in here, where kids are starting to take a little bit more control and we are starting to have a little bit less. These are often groups organized by skill and competency, and we're moving through so that during the course of a day or over the course of 2 days, we've moved to that high student control and low teacher support, where kids are independently reading texts, not just leveled text, text of their own choice, text of their own interest, alone and with partners. And we are moving around and having quick conferences with them, because that helps us monitor and plan for what we're going to do next in whole group and smaller group instructional pieces. Always looking at that gradual release of responsibility as we go through. So we think about what does it look like within the classroom. And again, we've talked about this, excuse me, when we look at last year's sessions. When do we have everybody together in a whole group? When do we have them pulled into small groups, whether it be interest groups or skill groups? When do we have them working individually one-on-one? And my current little rant is, when do we make sure that we have time for choice reading? Because I've been in too many classrooms this fall where teachers have said to me, well, we're not really doing any choice reading yet. It's much too early in the year. I want kids of all ages in all grades to have time every day to have a book that's of interest to them and to be reading it in a way that makes sense to them. So within our structures, I want to have all of the pieces coming through. So remember, this is part of that, what's my rant these days? Choice, talking with peers, making sure you have some time for reading. So this is an example, excuse me, from a 1-2 class. This doesn't have to be a grand event, but it does have to be planned for when we're thinking about that full range of diversity in our classes. In this school, they work with agendas. Now, I'm not actually sure it's the most important thing in the world, but it is something that's been chosen by the school, and everybody has an agenda. And when everybody has an agenda, that all parents want to make sure the agenda comes home every night with something in it, which can take an enormous amount of time. That's away from actual literacy work. But sometimes that's just the context, right, of what we're in. So after the kids have written down their agenda, which pretty much says home reading every night, unless there's a bulletin to come home. And of course, you know what that looks like. Everybody finishes at different times, but the agenda has to go home. Then what they get to do is choose a book or something that they've written or something that they're interested in. And they just gather in the carpet as they're getting ready for their day. That's the soft start, right? The soft start is, here's the agenda. You can do something as you're coming in, but you have to write down that home reading. And then guess what? You get to choose a book. So the day starts. For most kids, everybody's gathered by the time the agendas are finished, everybody's there with something to read as a way of getting started. Downside, some of those kids who are slower on the agenda don't get as much reading time. So we have to build that in again later as the day goes on. But one of the things that I really invite you to think about, or if you're building an administrator, to think about what's happening in your primary classrooms, are kids getting a chance to put their eyes on texts of their own choosing every day. How can we support that? So we think about the pieces. Who are our kids? What are we trying to teach? Leyton's become famous for no plan, no point. We're on that balance beam, thinking about, where am I taking them? Who are they? And we're designing our teaching, moving back and forth, linking those two as they go. So here's your first pause and reflect. We're going to give you, Leyton usually gives something like 91 seconds or something, but we're going to be totally generous and think about 2 minutes. So in that first flyby, as the two of us were talking, what resonated with you? What's running around in your brain, connected to your thinking, connected to your practice, connected to your plan? Was anything suggested thus far that nudged your thinking or that might nudge your practice that you're going to think a little bit more about? We're going to set a timer for 2 minutes, and then you will have a chance to put your thoughts, well, within that 2 minutes, depending on how fast your thinking is, into the chat room, and we'll do a quick scan to see what everybody says. How about you do your thinking and then add into the scat room? That's a good start. Into the chat room, giving yourself about 1.5 minutes, and then that'll get us all writing at about the same time. I'll tell you when 90 seconds is up, and then we'll have 30 seconds to compose. So that's 90 seconds. If you want to open your chat room and jot down a reflection or a thought, then we can see what that waterfall looks like when we have an explosion of thinking on paper. I love looking at the responses and thinking, oh, yes, and what about this? Oh, I thought about that too. Leyton, are you going to resist the urge to say something as you look at the chat before we move on?
I know we have to move on, but I do see a lot of, response to choice and how important choice reading is. I loved a couple of people talked about how like reading and writing aren't separate from each other and how those fit together. Coco used the term cozy. I love cozy routine because that's also something about feeling connected. What can I do? What am I doing? I'm going to read. I'm going to reread. So those really pop out. And then, lots of people also connected like me to the word work part and just that explicitness with the word work part in there. And yeah, really exciting. And then lots of people also responded to like teaching our kids and knowing our kids and moving from there with our students.
Thank you. Okay, so let us move on to some new pieces as we're going. So my piece in the adding on piece is to start thinking about composing and writing through the lens of a multi-age classroom and looking at those invitations. And I noticed that somebody, and I'm thinking it might have been Corey, but I'm not sure. No, maybe it wasn't Corey, said that communication is more than just writing. And it absolutely is, but I'm giving just a little heads up. I'm talking about the writing piece in this part. So it's not that I don't think other forms of communication are important, but one of the indicators that I want to be working with as I go through and spending time for all my kids is growing in the writing piece too. So two pieces. The first piece I want to talk about is the word piece as a way of starting. So again, and this won't be new to anybody who's listening today, but it is the hot topic everywhere we go. And there's just so much conversation around, do you do a prescribed program? Which program do you do? What is the sequence that you follow? How much time do you spend on it? And it's being interpreted in so many, many, many different ways around the province. But the piece that I think is the most scary to me and the most prevalent is teachers feeling that they don't know enough to be able to do the teaching of word work without a program directing them as to what to do. And I'm not convinced that that's true. I think that there's a piece that it can be really useful to look and see, especially if you're in a new grade or you haven't been conversation with others about this in a while, or you're new to the profession where you think about what does a progression actually look like? And how do I know that my kids are doing okay? And when should I be teaching more explicitly? And what can that look like in terms of organization? So my current favorite way to get some quick, notice the quick, assessment data on how my kids are doing at sound symbol, because of course it makes sense. You can't learn to read and write without knowing how letters and sounds come together into making words, is to start with a whole class spelling. Well, De Beers calls it a spelling inventory. It's all about sounds and symbols and letters. Okay? So let me take you into a grade 1-2 class and show you what this looks like and see how that fits on for your size. One of the things that's concerning me these days is that I think in our goals to get our kids into the right place for instruction, we're taking so much time with assessment that we're not having as much time to teach. And it's the teaching that teachers do that makes the difference. And so the teaching needs to be appropriate, but I also need to be teaching. So here's our spelling assessment looks like. And we told the kids we're doing a spelling assessment. We didn't call it a test. We said we're doing an assessment because that's a very sophisticated word, because that's what we do in grade 1 and grade 2 is very sophisticated thinking. And we're going to find out what it is you know right now about letters and sounds. And we're all going to do it together. And it's kind of like a party. Well, they were totally convinced this year that they were in a party with letters and sounds. And we've got a 1-2 class with a full range of diversity. And I'm using this as my dictate as we're starting. So this year, which is a little different than the samples I'm going to show you, because I couldn't find them to get my hands on them this morning. We said to the kids, could you put the numbers down the side of your page from 1 to 10? So think about what that's going to look like in your grade 1-2 classroom. That in itself is an assessment, because though there's numbers up there and kids can look at the numbers, figuring out how to put something down the side of the page, trying to figure out how to do from 1 to 10 is, it is a party in itself. And so we kind of got started on that. And then I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call out a word and I want you to listen for sounds. And if you hear a sound in this word that you think, I know how to put that down, I know what letter would make that sound, you can put it down. And if you hear one sound, you can put down one sound. If you hear more than one, you can put down more than one. If your brain says, I totally know how that word would look in a book, you can put down as many sounds as you think are in there. Okay. And we're doing it with a big flourish. Put your finger in the air, put your finger on the number 1. Check people who are sitting close to you. Do they have their finger on the same number 1? Okay, here comes the first word. It is fan. Do you hear any sounds in fan? And we go for about 10 words. Okay, now think about what your class looks like. Everybody is still not working on the same word by the time you get about number 5. It's totally okay, because we're not going around and saying, okay, Lisa, you've topped out. You can stop now. Okay, Kelly, well, you might want to try one more. Corey, that's a very nice job, but you could have a little rest now. Because we're just saying to everybody, wow, here comes the next one. What can you do here? What can you find? And they're all quite happy with just doing this very exciting thing. And it's only lasting 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, so it's a nothing time. So just a couple of examples, because what this should do for me is help me decide how to put my kids in groups. Because when I'm teaching sound symbol, they can't all get the same thing at the same time, because there's way too much diversity in there. So I'm totally wasting some kids' time when I'm doing everything at the same time. We're all doing ba together. Okay, not working for some kids because it's too hard, not working for other kids because it's too easy. So I'm looking at these samples and you can see what this first one, right? Fan, pet, dig, rob. Okay, well, Rob came out as robe because she was just waiting to do it in hope in the next word when she was putting in a silent E at the end. I'm just looking to see what kind of patterns, what kind of knowledge do they have? Where do we need to do a little bit more teaching? You can see they've done a pretty, she's got weight in the next one and she's figured out a vowel combination to get that long A sound. And when she got to sled, got the blend, which is supposed to be the new piece, missed the which she supposedly did in the second column. So it's all that piece about what are they holding on to? Where are they going next? And I'm looking at each sample to say, how's this going to fit into a little instructional group? Right? Same group. Okay. Fan, grade on fan. Pet, got one. Rob, got the whole thing. And then went down into initial sounds. Okay. This is when we learned, don't give something with boxes in it because it becomes too complicated for as what you're going to do. Now, we've got lots and lots of really good short A, fan, pat, dag, wrap, and then we changed and tried an O, and then we got right down to gum, which should have been way too hard because it was way down the list, and got gum exactly right because the U sound came through, right? So again, I'm thinking, what does the child know? Where do they need instruction? With that piece, I'm going to take my samples and I'm going to put them into 4 piles. Okay. Who's just beginning? Who's flying? Okay. So this is my easiest to pull out. And then I'm looking at what kids I've got left and I'm putting them into 2 groups. What's going to be a common teaching pattern here? What's going to be a common teaching pattern for the second group? And those are the kids that when my resource teacher is working with me in the classroom, we're going to decide who's going to take each of these 2 groups. So we can have one group working independently and one group working with whiteboards in front of us. And we can be teaching to what they need in terms of sound, symbol, and phonemic awareness. And if I'm doing a really focused teach on what that group of 5 kids needs, I am far more likely to have an impact on their independent reading and writing, which is my goal as we're going through. So I'm just looking at the patterns within this group. Not everybody knows all the letters of the alphabet yet, and that's part of what my grouping is going to be. But I can tell this pretty quickly with only a short period of assessment time. Now, these aren't skill groups for life, because as we're teaching and we're noticing that some kids are picking up on some of the patterns more quickly than others, we can flex around in the group as we're going through. I need to do direct instruction. It needs to come in a skill-based way. It doesn't need to happen every day for 20 minutes for all the kids in the classroom. And I need to be figuring out how this is going to work within that small skill-based group. And if I can do this with another teacher in the room, this is a highly effective use of our time as we're going through. This year in the 1-2 group, we went to we had 10 numbers down. We went till about 8 before we said to the kids, okay, we're going to play with this a little bit more with some kids over here at this table, and the rest can choose a book, and we're going to be over there in 10 minutes. And then we added on about 6 more words to see how much farther some of the more sophisticated writers could do at that point in time. So there's a skills piece. There's another piece when I'm looking at that diversity across the class that I want to make sure is happening, and that is writing. I want my kids writing daily in a multi-age primary classroom, and I want all of the kids involved in this work as we're doing it. So I've got 2 different samples to show you. They're both from a 1-2 class. They're both this fall. And I want you to be thinking about what would this look like with your students. Again, I'm doing this with everybody together. And within the writing piece, I want to make sure that I'm not thinking just about the meaning. We're starting with pictures. We're starting with lots of art as we go through. We're starting with lots and lots of oral language and experience, because I need to make sure that there's an access point for everybody in the group. I also need to make sure that as I'm working together with them, and I'm doing some writing on the board, I'm bubble gumming my words, I'm talking about the sound symbol as I'm putting them down. When I'm writing in front of my students, I'm modeling where I'm getting my ideas, what that's going to look like. So I've got meaning and words happening together. I like to keep the kids together on the carpet. So we're doing this in some form every day. We stay on the carpet until you have a beginning. And when you have your beginning, you can leave, which leaves me with an automatically differentiated group. Kids who think they're not yet ready to begin and they need a little more teaching time. So my kids have left, are ready to start independently. The rest who are still with me can have more of me. Okay. When they're leaving, I want them to make sure that they've got something that they can start with that comes from the prompt that we've had. And then as they go back out, when they're starting with a picture, they can build their story around the picture. As they're getting ready to move beyond that, they can start to label their picture and add some letters and sounds to it. And as they are working, I am moving around the classroom, having quick one-on-one conferences with everybody, because that's the most critical time for me to be out there. I've done some direct teaching with my modeling and the language work we've done at the beginning, but now I'm differentiating as I move around and quickly chat with the kids as they're working and they're going through. So let me take you into this lesson and give you a little sense of what the lesson looked like to start, and then show you a variety of the students' samples in here. So in this class, we had been talking about bears for a while, and bears that had been seen at Whistler, black bears, and then a grizzly bear. And then there was a story about how this is unusual. And so there's some background on grizzlies. And now one of the teachers has seen a polar bear. And so there's a polar bear picture that comes in. Now the kids start, and what they're doing in this case has been projected, and then they're labeling it as they go. Well, the kids are pretty convinced that this still must be a grizzly bear because it's what we've talked about before. So though some of them are prepared to let it be a polar bear, there's a group are sticking with the grizzly, and it's grizzly that they want it labeled as. And since that isn't the most important part of the lesson, we don't sort of go down on that hill, but we let it be called a grizzly while we talk about it being polar. So they've labeled other pieces. You can see that there's a little piece on the left-hand side where there's been a reminder about vowels, because it's part of what the classroom conversation is. We're making sure that we've got some vowels, a vowel or two in each word. They're really looking at details. It's been one of the things that they've been trying to add to their story. You can see the pieces. We're bubblegumming some of the words, not all of the words, because that takes too long. And you're thinking about the range and the diversity in the class. And so there are different kids when they're thinking about details as to what they want to have in. So there's sky and mountains in the background, a little bit of sand. We talked about rocks and how that CK is coming in as one sound, and given them the boxes to show what that looks like. We've added in a scorpion and a barnacle and a white creature because they've decided that they would be important in this picture, but there's been lots and lots and lots of conversation around it. As I said, when you're ready to begin, what do you think is your story behind this picture? Then they move en masse, and some stay for a little more teaching because they're not quite ready to go. Now, one of the things that was interesting on this particular day was that two teachers were working together. And one of the teachers was writing down some of the ideas that the kids had mentioned that they might want to use in their story. Now, this isn't typically what the kids are used to. And I loved this as an example. You'll see it in the kids' work because it shows how quickly kids respond to the way we teach. Okay, this is not a bad idea to be recording some of the things that you might want to include, some of the things that we've talked about in here. It gives us a chance to come back and reread them. There's all kinds of words that are embedded in here. It's based on their experiences and their language. But this wasn't as common an introduction for the kids. What was common was the teacher starting her writing in front of the kids. So she didn't start it today. She just talked to them about how she'd start. Now, one of the things she's been doing is that this fall, she's really been talking about story beginnings and hooking the reader. So as they were getting ready to go, she said to the kids, without writing it down, if I were starting my story today, I would say on a gloomy day in Canada, because it tells us about where we are. It tells us about what the day feels like. It gives us a little weather piece. That would be my hook. So as the kids write, excuse me, here's what I want you to notice as they're going through. So this first one, okay, I think this is multi-age. So they've started, most of them have started with a picture, but not all. So this little guy is in grade 1. And I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but what I want you to notice is, and be thinking about, what does he know about writing and language and expressing his thinking? And what's one thing that we can be moving a little bit forward with? There was a bear that was eating a crab until a storm came. I don't know the next word. The water flooded. Then the bear got caught in the water. And the bear played in the sky. And I'm not sure what he said at the end. He dictated a story, which was quite different, which is what you see on the left-hand side. This is the story that he dictated that went with his picture. Okay. There once was a bear. The bear was sitting, eating a crab. People were camping in the forest, and then there was a flood, and the bear got caught on the flood, and it fell on the tent. And then the flood was over, and so the bear needed to help get the people out of the water. Okay, so his story that he tells is a little bit different than the story that he writes. He's grade 1. It's the middle of October. Look at what he knows about words, okay, and sounds and symbols. And he's got he's got the piece that we're going to put spaces between our words. And sometimes he puts the spaces in the middle of the word because you can see that he's still bubblegumming it out. So it's now turned into the next word. The air was, and then the was is still coming into the bear that was eating. But if you read it the way he's saying it in his head, it makes perfect sense. And he has a phenomenal amount of sound symbol going on in here. Now, he's checked out, he's got, I'm not even talking more about that. What I want to be noticing as I'm going around is I want the child to read it to me. I want to comment on what I notice them doing and give them some positive feedback. And if I'm going to give them one hint, is one thing that you could do that might move your thinking forward. Now, if I wanted to focus this on my one thing that came up, I might put eating together in one word, because he's doing such a great job with putting his sounds and his symbols together that if we looked and talked how that ing, because they all love ing, comes into all one word, we wouldn't need to have the space in there. Okay. Each time you get one hint to move yourself forward, you get a massive impact on working with it. Now, notice, remember the one gloomy day? So this little one is in grade 2. One sunny day, a grizzly bear came to Canada. Okay, so it's only been oral, but notice how that child has hung on, because that becomes a way that they can start, but they've personalized it by changing. One sunny day, a grizzly bear came to Canada. It smelled fish. And it said they had lots of fish here. Oh, I can eat them. Yummy. Oh, I wonder, this is about something about tea, they were having more. And then there's a dialogue pops in. No, stop. There's plenty of fish here. So they could share. Now, this is read with great gusto, huge enthusiasm. Did you notice there's talking in my story? And notice the pieces of what's come through in here. So much more developed and where the word spaces are going. Day has got, a backwards D. I might be, based on where this child is at this point, I might be fixing up that as I come through. And smelled, done a great job, but we might be able to, if I was going to choose one word in here, look at the symbols that are coming into smelled or the sounds that are coming in, and maybe try and get that sm blend in at the beginning, though that is a tricky thing to hear. I'm going to skip the next one because I just want to get to a couple of different ones. The child on the left is working, knows probably can identify about half the letters of the alphabet, has a massive oral story around her picture and what's happening. She wants to find the word barnacle on the board. Now, she can't read all of the letters in Barnacle, but she's really good on the precision of doing matching as she goes through. And she wants a barnacle on each one of those mountains. And that's why there's 5 circles at the bottom, because every one of those circles represents a barnacle that all comes out in her oral story. So my teaching piece here is to listen to the story, to acknowledge and celebrate the story that comes with it. And because we're working on letters, just letters as a way of beginning, to look at barnacle, which is a word that she is very excited about, and see how many of those letters we can identify together. Next to her, we have a little girl in grade 2 who's taken a fair amount of time coming into print and works very much to her own drummer. So whatever it is that's going on, there's going to be a twist in what she attends to and what is presented. Grizzly was cold. He saw, S-U-L-A, a toque and a scarf. He learned how to fish. The man showed him. He sold fish. Huge amounts of writing for what she usually does. Very excited. Part she likes the best in here, the toque and the scarf on the grizzly. And her story goes, and you can see in her drawing, she has her toque and her scarf on her grizzly. So she's taken that same piece, moved it again into her own story, and is moving forward. Now, what am I celebrating? She has written in sentences. This is a massive growth from some of the work that we've seen. You can see this next piece coming through. And I am going to work on one word in here, and it's going to be saw. But you can almost hear her saying it to herself. She saw a fish, sula a fish, and this is all part of what her processing is going. Again, they're all in the same class. I need to think about what is my teaching piece looking like to invite all of these kids in to help move them along their journey. One rainy day in the beach of Quebec, a hungry seagull was looking for clams. So he flew to the beach where the most clams were to eat. And he found along the way he flew all the way from Canada's beach to Quebec's beach. And suddenly he heard a rumble. He woke a grizzly bear, but the worst was that he was hungry. So he quickly snatched a clam, and he hid it in the corner. He was so freaked out. So he sneakily came out and he got a crab and he got the meat. Yummy, he said, too loud that the bear found him. She said, why are you hiding? I just wanted to play hide and seek. So they started playing and playing, and they played together and they became friends. The end. Okay. All these kids in the same class responding to the same group piece as they're going through. And one last little guy in grade 2, on a gloomy day, there was a bear in Manitoba. The bear was in the mountains, and then, excuse me, and then someone saw the bear, and the bear was so big, and the guy ran away. So the guy said to his friends, and then the bear said to his friend to go up to help them. And then the guy got the bear. And they got to, I guess, live happily ever after. Now, think about what this looks like in terms of dealing with the diversity in a multi-age classroom. Is there room for everybody? First of all, is there a teaching piece? What is my focus? Is my teaching having an impact? Everybody has to be engaged. Everybody has to have something to do. Everybody has to have something to do that can get some individual coaching that will help move them along the continuum. And everything doesn't have to be right all the time. Okay, we're growing in stages as we go through. Does my setup in my writing give me enough opportunity to allow those who are writing much more fluently and fluidly and playing with different kinds of spelling patterns and thinking room to grow? And does it provide enough support that my kids who need more support, whether it's in the storying or in putting the words on paper, can see themselves within this exercise and stay engaged and involved with the work that's going on while I have time to do the one-on-one piece? The one other piece, and I'm just going to talk about this one very quickly, is thinking about the same way of starting, but in this case, we're dividing into 2 different groups from a shared beginning. So we're reading Mr. Fine Porcupine, when we're all together on the carpet, we're talking about fine and word families that can come around fine, and we're brainstorming and making a list. And then we're talking about porcupine and finding 3 syllables in here and noticing at the end of porcupine rhymes with fine. And if you took out just those last 4 letters, you'd get pine, and it could be part of our word family. So we're doing some particular work around just the title, rhyming, word families, multisyllabic words. We're talking about what do we know about porcupines and what do we think might be happening, because we don't read a book just for the decoding and finding word patterns, and we don't read it only for the meaning, never talking about any of the words and the word choices. When we've read partway through, we stop, and the kids' task, if they're ready to write, is to leave the carpet. They can start with a picture. Mr. Fine has run into a problem. He has no friends because of his quills. And the latest issue he's had is that the kids have been blowing bubbles and his quills have popped all the bubbles. And so he thinks maybe if he puts fruit on the end of his quills, that would prevent the quills from popping the bubbles and he could find some friends. So we stop reading there. The kids go back. They're going to, their task is, do you think this is going to help? How could you continue the story? And what they're going to do is they can either think of the fruit that's going to go on these quills or continue the story. So they have some choices. We keep a select group of kids at the carpet to write together. Okay? And these are the kids that are still learning the letters of the alphabet. The others are independent. They can start. They all have an access point in this task. These kids were going to do an interactive write. And so we have about 7 kids on the carpet, and I'm sitting with the kids and we decide we're going to write a sentence about Mr. Fine, and we decide we're going to say Mr. Fine is a porcupine. And so we talk about all those big concepts that you need to know when you're cracking into print. It's going to be a sentence. It will have 5 words. Mr. Fine is a porcupine. And we say the sentence together several times, and we keep counting the words. Mr. Fine is a porcupine, because this is all a Greek language to kids who haven't started playing with print yet. Words and sentences and spaces between words and vowels and consonants. It needs to come back into something that they can hold on to. When we do this together, my goal is to write nothing on the board myself. In an interactive write, the kids are going to be in charge of all the writing. And so we practice. We're going to start with an uppercase for Mr. Fine. Okay. And Melody gets to do it first, because I want this whole thing to last about 10 minutes max. When I've only got 7 kids there, I need them to get back into something else and bigger, but this is going to be concentrated and focused and tight. So she knows how to do that uppercase M. She shows us. We write it on our arms. We write it on both arms. She comes up, she puts it on the board, and we go through, how do you write Mr.? And we're going to leave a space, and then we do fine, is a porcupine. We talk about upper and lower case. It doesn't always get translated correctly. As we're going, it gets better with more practice. We read it together. Sometimes they can do the same thing if I'm doing a bigger group on their own whiteboards, but if I've only got half a dozen or 7 kids, we've got enough space that everybody's going to have a place in there, and we can all look at our words as they're going through. So they're getting some more specific work while the others are back working with their writing and thinking on the page. And so again, just looking and thinking about what does that range look like in there? Is there room for everybody? Okay. Now, so this one started, once upon a time, I am a porcupine and spiky, and I make people run away. Okay. Now, this time there's a comment written on the bottom because I'm working with this little group of kids. I'm not out there to do my one-on-one coaching with the other kids at the same time. So I can write a comment to them as I'm going with the intention that they might add on an answer, and young kids love to answer. If you were a porcupine, what would you have in your quills? An apple. Okay. The next one has decided to write down a bunch of fruit, and there's some fruit names around in the classroom. And so these fruits are just being placed down there easily as they put it down while they talk about the fruit that they would go on. My favorite part of the one on the left is the fact that she's really explained what's going to be happening on the fruit tree, and that they're growing from, there's vines growing around it. She'd done a picture on the other side where she'd had roots underneath it and then changed her mind and decided she wanted vines instead. The porcupine doesn't want to pop bubbles, and so we put fruit on his quills, and then she lists off about 20 different fruits, with commas between them, and almost everything spelt with far more accuracy than inaccuracy. And the only reason she stopped is because we've run out of time, as she's saying to kids around her, can you think of some more fruit that I could put in? Could you put in some more fruit? Yeah? And in the same piece, working independently, is apple, blueberry, banana, and the bottom one is pineapple, as they're putting through. So that piece, we get better by practice with teaching and coaching. And similarly, I love this porcupine because he looks like a piranha in there. But again, with comment there from the teacher. So here's the piece I want you to think about. When we're looking at a multi-age classroom and we're looking at inviting kids into the communication piece of literacy, I firmly believe they need to be writing every day. They need to be taught. This isn't choice. There's choice within this writing, but it's not choice writing. It's very different than moving to a center and saying, what would you like to work on in your writing today? I don't think there's enough teaching in that for most kids, especially in a multi-age class where they need the diversity and they need that instruction from us. So think about this. How does this writing pedagogy connect to your thinking and your practice? What are some ideas that might have nudged your thinking or might nudge your practice? Or probably a third one you could have in there is something that you're wondering about. So let's do the same kind of pattern. 90 seconds to think. I'll tell you when the 90 seconds is up. Okay, Leyton, this time I'm not giving you a little voice in here. I'm going to be the voice as we lead in to the next piece with Briana and Jacquie, because this piece that I want you to think about as we're going through. So I focused on a 1-2 multi-age piece, and Jacquie and Briana are going to focus on a K1. So a couple of you talked about what would this look like with my Ks. I'm wondering how that will go in, and some answers and prompts and suggestions are going to happen as we come forward. So I'm going to stop my screen share and you guys can leap in on the next piece.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invite to share today. Jacquie and I got to work together all year last year and collaborate for the entire year, which was pretty exciting and special. And so we're looking forward to just sharing our journey today of kind of some of the things that we tried. We wanted to start, though, by saying that we are together today in one of our elementary schools here in Richmond, and we want to just acknowledge that we live and work and learn and play on the traditional and unceded territories of the Hunkaminam speaking language group where we are today. So my name is Briana Adams. In the Richmond School District, I work as a teacher consultant for literacy, kindergarten to grade 7, which means that I basically just get to go around to different schools and collaborate with teachers and be thinking partners with teachers and go in and try things in classrooms. And last year I was lucky enough that Jacquie invited me into her classroom and we got to try a whole bunch of things together.
And I'm Jacquie Crozier. I'm an early primary teacher in the Richmond School District. And as we've mentioned, I had a kindergarten and grade 1 classroom last year, and Briana came in and helped me on Tuesday mornings, and we got to work together. My group of students last year was very diverse, ranging from kids who were learning their letters and their letter sounds all the way to kids who were fluent readers and writing independently. They were a very diverse group of kids in that lots of English language learners. Many of the families had just come or had newly arrived to Canada. And so there was a wide range of learners in my classroom.
As Jacquie and I started collaborating together last year, I know Faye shared this briefly earlier in her session, but it kind of just to set the context for our work together. Our district had just come out with our framework for literacy for kindergarten to grade 2 called the Pillars of Literacy. And I just wanted to bring this back on the screen because Jacquie and I used this as the basis for our planning and our collaboration and the way in which we thought about how we could plan for all of the learners in her classroom. One of the questions that Jacquie brought to me when we first started our conversation was this big range of learners in her multi-age K-1 classroom, and how we could begin to plan some literacy and some reading activities that would be supportive and inclusive for all of her learners. And so we use these pillars of literacy as a way to anchor our planning and our conversations together. And when we started those conversations, it really led into our professional inquiry question that we wanted to explore together for the year. And so what it was how can we collaborate to support all learners to develop skills from the pillars of literacy and to grow as readers, writers, thinkers, and communicators. And that brought us back to that range of learners in our classroom, thinking about who they are, what we know about those learners, and then how we could set up some whole class, some small group learning opportunities, and using kind of a literacy centers model in order to create opportunities for the teachers to work with each student and to help provide some of that explicit skill instruction and then practice for everyone. And so that's kind of what we played with and wanted to try as we went through the year. One of the first pieces when we were thinking about our Tuesday morning time together and kind of how we were going to organize that time together is we knew we wanted to start with something, some sort of whole class learning. We knew that this was really important for us in terms of setting intentions for the day. We also knew that it could be a great opportunity for some explicit instruction, that modeling piece that Faye talked about earlier, and an opportunity to practice some of the skills or to review or refresh on some of the skills that we'd already talked about or learned together as a class. We also really thought that it's a first start of the morning that we wanted to have a shared learning experience with our classroom learning community, with everyone together, doing some literacy together. And so we tried a variety of different things during our whole class learning experiences. I'll share a couple pieces of some of the ones that were our favorites that we did together. Her class loved the Foxy and Friends books by Linda Henney. So we used that a lot as some of our anchor pieces for our class as we were planning our whole class learning experiences. We did a lot with songs and poems. And so you'll see in the picture on this one, this is one of the song or poem that kind of goes with the Foxy and Friend books. And so we talked a lot about letters and sounds, words that we knew. What do we think the animals would enjoy doing if they were playing in the forest? What connections could we make to things that we liked doing when we were outside playing with our friends? So we were able to tie in that comprehension piece, some of the phonemic awareness pieces, and the phonics pieces, and invite the students to engage with that poem in many different ways, even though we were doing this as a whole class learning experience. One of the other examples from her class was working with a piece of text and doing a bit of a shared reading. We did a lot of shared reading pieces together during that whole class learning experience. Sometimes we worked with a piece of text from a book, like this one from one of the Foxy and Friends books. Sometimes it took more of the shape of a morning message, but thinking about some specific aspect of phonics that was kind of being worked on as a class. So for this one, we were having a little bit of that focus and explicit instruction around some of those digraphs, the ch and the th and the sh. But we were also having opportunities for students to come in and fill in beginning sounds, because we knew that we had some learners in the class that were still working on identifying beginning sounds and practicing some of those letters and sounds that they make. We also had opportunities to have some missing words. And some of the reasons for that was, as Jacquie mentioned, many of her learners in her class were English language learners. And so this was an opportunity to build vocabulary and to practice some of that language together as a class. And so as students were trying to make guesses, for instance, that first one, you can see foxy and bear, and then they brainstorm skunky or friends or owl or moose. And then we were able to start giving clues, and we were able to tie in some of that phonics and word work pieces by saying, oh, it starts with that sound. And so what letter makes that sound? Which one of the things that we guessed starts with that sound? We've done it with syllables. Oh, it's a word that has 2 syllables or 3 syllables. And so practicing some of that phonemic awareness and that phonics work as we were also brainstorming and connecting to background knowledge and building vocabulary. And so this was a routine that we used quite a bit as a whole class. We also did things like interactive writing. We did things like working with images like Faye shared, all those kinds of activities to have that whole class learning experience and to practice some of those skills that we wanted to work on together. And when we were planning those experiences, we were really trying to think about our district's pillars of literacy, and that we are having opportunities for comprehension, we are having opportunities to practice building vocabulary and the phonics and the phonemic awareness pieces, the decoding pieces. So we were trying to think of ways to tie in all aspects of that literacy learning that we wanted to include. So we started our day with whole class learning experience together for about 5-10 minutes as a group. And then we moved into literacy centers.
So as Briana mentioned, then we were moving from that whole class now into smaller groups, and we developed our literacy centers kind of around that focus, whatever it was that we had focused on as a whole class. We then provided opportunities to practice some of those skills. We found that giving choice and flexibility was really important for keeping the students' engagement. So they had a choice of what center they wanted to go to. They were able to move from one center to another if they had finished and wanted to try out a different literacy center. And within those centers, we offered choices. So there was those access points for all of our learners. We might have a couple of choices at one center, one that was a little bit more challenging than another. Again, just practicing those skills that we had already explicitly taught and practiced together as a whole group, so that when students went away, they were able to work independently, so that we were then able to work with smaller groups or one-on-one with students. And just thinking about things that were highly engaging for them, and that we're going to keep their attention, things that they were interested in, things that were meaningful for them. And then, like I said, just opportunities for us teachers to work with smaller groups of students. So these are just some examples of our literacy centers. We did a whole variety, but these were some of our favorites that we kept coming back to in various ways. This was reading detectives. So at this literacy center, kids are looking through books and acting like a detective to find particular letters or particular, like we worked with the digraphs, so they're looking for those sounds as they're reading through. And so again, just offering that choice. So for some kids, for some of my Ks, they were looking for letters and maybe identifying the letter and the sound, whereas others were looking for those digraphs, or possibly in older grades, you might be looking for, this is from one of Briana's other classes, but they were working on the EE and the EA sound. And so you can really differentiate the center depending on what you were focusing on with your whole group, and then providing opportunities for all your learners. Another center that was really popular was the bookmaking. And so here, again, this looked different depending on what we were doing, but if it was a Foxy and Friends theme, then a lot of our students love to make their own Foxy and Friends books. We would provide different sizes of books or different templates for them to use. You can see that on the chart paper, we put up the characters, so they had the names and the characters to refer to as they were writing their stories. We sometimes also gave them the characters and they could cut and paste. So for some of those kids that the drawing piece is maybe a bit more challenging for them, they can just get right into their writing, and rather than worrying about the drawing, they can glue in the characters. They also, my class loved last year, they loved these sticker books, sticker stories. And so with those, on each page, they are allowed to put one sticker and then draw around that sticker and build their story. Again, these are just some examples of the beginning of their stories. One of them is called The Enchanted Forest. Foxy and his friends went to a black hole. So just honoring their ideas and their stories. And then another center, we often had one that was involved making words, and this looked different depending on the day. Sometimes at the start of the year, it might have been working with names and having them use letters to build their name, to build their friends' names. A big focus in my classroom last year was sea otters. And so we did a lot of work around otter vocabulary and building otter vocabulary with the different letters, practicing printing on the whiteboards, and building vocabulary that way. We also used the alphabet tubs and small objects to do all sorts of things, but I think this day we were working on short vowel sounds. And so playing with letters and giving lots of opportunity for all learners to feel successful.
And one of the things with that one was that students were able to choose an object, and then they could either put the beginning sound or any sounds that they heard. So some students were able to put all of the sounds that they heard in the word. Some students might have just put an S for sun or an S and an N. And so there was access points for all students to pick whatever object was of interest to them, and then to listen to the sounds and write and or choose any of the magnet letters that they thought fit the sounds that they heard. We just wanted one quick slide to share a little bit about some other ideas for literacy centers for upper primary. And there's lots of different ones, and all of the ones that we shared are possible to do with older primary students as well. But some of our other favorite ones are readers theater. Using the elephant and piggy books are super fun because each student can be one of the characters in the book. And they can read that together and practice reading with expression and fluency. Also working with nonfiction texts a lot, having students look through a variety of nonfiction texts, and we would put out books that had a variety of challenging in terms of the reading level or reading difficulty, and then being able to find interesting facts and bring that back to the class later to share after. And so as literacy centers were happening in the classroom and we were collaborating and working together, one of the things that we were really wanting to do was to find opportunities for teachers to work in small groups to provide a little bit more of that explicit instruction and just right practice for our learners for where they were at. As Jackie said, we had a wide range of learners, from students that were just beginning to learn their letters of the alphabet and the sounds they make, to students who were very fluent readers and very confident writers. And so we wanted to have opportunities for small group learning to do that explicit instruction. A few things that were really important to us: that this was not pull out of the classroom. This was bring a group to a table, invite them to come on over for 5-8 minutes, and then back they went to their choice of activities. And the groups were also flexible. We did planning and we talked often together. Jackie knew her students incredibly well and spent a lot of time reading with her students one-on-one and getting a sense of who they are as learners, not just as readers and writers, but also their interests. So we were able to form our groups and to have those groups be flexible on any given week as to, okay, who needs what and what could we do in a little bit of a small group instruction to provide that learning this week. And so that was really important to us, that it was this very flexible opportunity for us to just bring a small group together and do a little bit of instructions. We also planned for those small groups going back to our district's pillars of literacy. And so looking at the pillars, and I won't go through what was circled in red, but we would often highlight or look at the pillars and think about what are some of the skills that we're noticing coming up for groups of students that we could then bring together to do some work on some of those skills. And it might be one or two of these pieces at any given time. It might be multiple ones of these pieces in a small group on any given day. So for this group of students, this might have been some of the skills that we thought this group could be working on, and we would bring a group together to work on these skills. And here are some of the things that we tried together. And so sometimes this looked like a small group skills-based instruction where we were playing games and working with whiteboards or manipulatives. Our district put alphabet tubs in all of our kindergarten and grade 1 classrooms last year. And so on the right, you'll see the toys from the alphabet tubs. And so for this group of students working on some of those phonemic awareness skills like beginning sounds and ending sounds was something that we were working on. So we use those alphabet tub toys to dump them out and sort them back in. Also, because we had so many learners who were ELL or English language learners, there was so much vocabulary building also connected to those toys in those alphabet tubs. So there was that added piece of vocabulary building. They loved this little game on the left called Where Is, where we could play this in many different ways using pictures. We hid the characters from Foxy and Friends in the envelopes, and they would have to try and guess where the Foxy and Friends characters were hiding by either whatever our intention was that week, either identifying the beginning sound. So I think it's hiding in fox, and that starts with a f sound, or maybe the ending sound. With some of her students that were a little bit stronger in their phonemic awareness, maybe we were segmenting it into the sounds and they were having to build it on the whiteboard then with manipulatives or write it on a whiteboard to try and guess where that hidden object was. That same group, we did a lot of alphabet work. So alphabet bingo and playing all sorts of letter games as well was popular. They loved this Go Fish game where they were fishing for different letters of the alphabet and then practicing identifying them and the sounds that they make. And we also wanted to make sure that that group of students who were really learning their letters and sounds, that they were also still getting lots of work with text too. It wasn't just simply skills-based work on some of those phonics, that there were opportunities to practice those skills in text. And so sometimes that small group, we were looking and working with books. And even if we weren't able to read all the words on the page, we were noticing letters on the pages together. We were talking about how many letter I's can we count on this page? Can we find the word bird? How do we know that it says bird? What sound does it start with? We made a lot of predictions and connections to what do we know about things that live in trees? What do we think we're going to find out in this book when we're thinking about what lives in trees? And we did a brainstorm together, and then we looked through and read the book together and tried to find out what we know. So we were tying in, sometimes it was work on some of those phonics skills and phonemic awareness skills, but it was also work on those comprehension pieces as well and practicing some of those skills with a text. Another group might have had different focus in terms of some of the pieces that they were working on. And so this would be a group that was working a little bit more on short vowel patterns. They had their consonant sounds, they had their short vowel sounds when we're working on reading words with those together. We're working more on some of the decoding, again, in those comprehension pieces. So we might play some games, again, that where is game. Maybe we played it with short vowel words. We did a lot of work on whiteboards. I think Faye talked about this a little bit earlier too, changing out the first sound and playing around with some of those words. Can you write this word? Can you say nest? Can you change it to test? Can you change it to best? And playing around with some of those words as we were doing some word work. We played with nest in this one because the book that we were going to read together that day involved a huge part of it talked about a gorilla's nest. And so that was an interesting word that we played with. And so it also looked a lot like guided reading with that group. So looking at a text together and coming together, talking about this group, at that point in the year, Jackie's class, we were really looking at asking wonder questions before we started and trying to then find out if we could find the answers to some of that information as we were reading. So we brainstormed some wonder questions together. We did a little bit of a walkthrough of the text and talked about some of the vocabulary that was going to come up. And then students read the text independently on their own. And the teacher went around and was able to listen in and to have little reading conferences with each student. But we'd set the intention of what information could you find about some of our wonder questions. And so students had a whiteboard, and when they were done reading, they were able to think about or to write down a sentence about one of the facts that they found or answers to some of our wonder questions or something interesting. And then we could come back together and practice that as well. And so that was kind of different pieces those small groups could look like to kind of target what we thought each group could use for some explicit instruction.
And then after we had time at our centers and working with our small groups, we always came back together as a whole class and asked the students, what did they work on as a reader or writer today? Was there anything that they wanted to share? They loved to also share their books if they'd been at the bookmaking center, and really it was a chance for us to really celebrate them as authors and inspire other kids to start writing stories. And then we always ended with a read aloud. So again, usually it was connected to what we had begun our lesson with. So if it was a Foxy and Friends book, a picture from that at the start of the lesson, we'd come back and we would read the Foxy and Friends story together as a whole class. So our reflections and what did we notice? We noticed that this was such a joyful time in my classroom, and that the students really look forward to Tuesday mornings every week. And Briana and I also found a lot of joy in this time and loved working together. And we loved that we were able to work with all of our learners, and we felt like we were really moving them along in their learning.
Mm-hmm. And we also noticed that one of the keys for planning literacy centers and small groups was knowing the students. And like I mentioned before, Jackie knew her students so incredibly well. I was only in there once a week, so I didn't get to know them as well as she did, but over the year I did. And really their interests and their strengths and the skills that we wanted to work on, knowing those students made it so much easier to design those learning experiences. And collaboration helped, being able to do things together and to work together in order to support all learners. And it's just more fun to do it together and to have a thinking partner when we were doing it. That's
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for listening to us. And we hope that you feel inspired to try something from today in your own context.
Huge thanks, Briana and Jackie. It's a tall order to follow Faye Brownlie. But you offered us beautifully practical examples. It's so fun to watch the pictures because I know the kids behind the stars.
Mhm.
And to meet the little girl who followed me around to tell me everything, and then the little fellow who was like hiding his book, and then finally it's like, okay, I did write a story, and it's about a gorilla. But it really reminds us that we have to kind of find ways to work with our kids, to group them in meaningful ways, to target skills, and then to directly teach them those skills, but then also have playful practice at the same time in a way that's targeted. So I'm going to give you the final word, and then I'm going to set us up for next time.
I muted myself, I guess. Okay. I have a couple of final words. First of all, I just it is so fun to listen and hear you describe the literacy work in your class, because I, like Leyton, have been in just for a tiny little bit, but the piece that struck me when I was in was how engaged the kids were and how deliberate and direct the instruction was. And that, as you were talking about what you did, I thought several things were coming to my mind. One was the intentionality. And a second one was the power of a collaboration. Briana said she was there once a week. What a difference that makes, having somebody to talk to, whether it's somebody who's the teacher across the hall, it's the resource person in your school, it's your building administrator. There are several of my favorite building administrators here today. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, imagine having, Lisa in your classroom or Corey in your classroom, or bouncing ideas off them in terms of the planning. The way you use the pillars, and it was asked, could they be shared? I believe this slide share, these slides come up, Leyton, if I'm not incorrect, as part of the packaging when the video comes out. But I can't think of any reason why we couldn't also just send that K2 piece out. Can you, Briana? If it just... Yeah. It could be emailed out to people if they wanted to look, because the way you used it in planning was exquisite.
Thank you. We do have permission to share it, so we can email it if people are wanting it.
Yeah. So I want to come back to one more, just a reflection piece before you take over for the big ending and your grand finale, because I'm hoping as people, as we're here today and we're thinking about just our own journey as literacy leaders in the classroom, and in this case, in that multi-age piece, and think about when you're reflecting on your own literacy programming. And Briana and Jackie looked and said, here's what we're thinking about when we reflect back on what we've done, because we know the power of the teacher in the classroom, and we're thinking about that all the time. What am I doing that's having the greatest impact? What am I doing that's making a difference? And so just before Leyton does a little dance around his closure, I want you to think about what's changed in what you're doing with literacy, in the balance, or how you put your pieces together. We teach the kids we get. Jackie and Briana, or Jackie's class, had lots and lots of English language learners in it. A group of teachers I was talking with on Friday were talking about the complexity of some of the kids in their classes this year. And I was thinking afterwards, it's so true. But when I think back 15 years, 20 years, we have kids in our classes now that wouldn't have been alive 15 and 20 years ago, just because of the medical support that we've had. And so it adds to the complexity, the challenge and the joy of our classroom. And so we're constantly evolving, and we're constantly thinking about, is what I'm doing getting me what I want, and what else do I need to do? So I invite you to think about that, and to think forward and think, well, I'm wondering about some part of my practice that I might want to polish, and other pieces that I want to keep. And so what are you thinking about in terms of that personal stretch? And of course, what are you taking away from today? What will you try? I think Linda Henney, we've got to make sure that she gets this video, because she will be dancing when she thinks about how these books, Foxy and Friends, are being used in the classroom, and how much joy the kids are taking from them. And because that was her intent. And I hear from Linda that she's written her last book And she says, I think I've done 30 and I think that's what it is. And I'm now going to really try retirement here. And I think, oh my gosh, what a retirement project. Did those books ever influence a lot of kids around this province and elsewhere? So as you're thinking forward and you're thinking about those big ideas that we started with, the choice, the relationships, the knowing your kids, the working together, finding a place for everybody and supporting them on their journey. I know my brain's full from having listened to others, and I hope that yours is too. And Leyton, now you can do your closure.
Great. No big closure. Just thanks everyone for attending. We look forward to seeing you Monday, February 5th, and have a wonderful week. We're looking forward to all the great things that you're doing with kids and sharing them the next time we come together. Have a great evening and take good care, everyone.